There's a surprisingly large amount of movies based around the simple idea of surviving middle school, and even more of those are based on a book. So why do these movies in particular stand out, and do they stand out for a good or bad reason? I mean, when they're brought up, everyone chimes in saying they love them and have tons of nostalgia for them, but they don't ever really say anything about them, and that's on the very, very rare chance that they actually are brought up in the first place. Unless, of course, it's to complain about the new Roderick in the long haul. So I decided that I, as a very moderate fan of the series and someone who tends to keep up with the books that these movies are based on, would go back and take another closer look at these things just to see what's so special about them. So, without further ado, let's review The Diary of a Wimpy Kid Trilogy.
She's a girl. Where do I grab her?
First, we come to the first movie, simply titled Diary of a Wimpy Kid. There's no big story here, it's just where the series got its start. Our protagonist, Greg Heffley, enters middle school for the first time and is trying his best to not only fit in, but rise to the top. And ironically, all of his attempts to do so, including the putting down and constant abuse of his best friend Rowley Jefferson, causes him to end up being viewed as less than what he originally started out as. Now, before I get into any deeper details, I want to go ahead and compliment this movie on one thing: how well it follows the book. Now, of course, there were a few additions and changes to help this book convert to a film, like this new character, Angie, who never showed up in any of the books and is actually super boring and snarky and actually annoying. But she isn't in there that much, and she doesn't really take away from anything when she is there, so I guess I'll let her slide. Back to my main point though. Most, if not all of the scenes of this movie are directly from the book, even kept mostly in chronological order. For example, at the beginning of the movie, we get a scene where Roderick pranks Greg, making him think that it's time for school, weeks before the school year actually starts. In the books, this wasn't mentioned until halfway through, yet they remembered to keep it at the beginning of the movie. Just a neat little detail I picked up on.
It's not mine.
It was in your backpack.
No, it was in my room.
Speaking of Roderick though, there's also plenty of other characters here. There's Greg's little brother Manny, his parents Susan and Frank Heffley, there's Chirag Gupta, who is basically the third wheel to Greg and Rowley's friendship, then there's Fregley, the super weird kid, there's Greg's rival Patty Farrell, just a whole bunch of people. Every single one of these characters is just casted so well, and they end up stealing the show whenever they're on screen. All these characters are another reason why it's so impressive that the movie follows so closely to the original books. There's just a ton they have to keep track of. The teens that Greg annoys on Halloween, the whole comic strip and safety patrol subplot, the play, and yet it all fits together and is paced super duper well. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because there are a couple problems. For one, the humor. It's not bad. A lot of it is physical comedy and small clever jokes that kids will find funny, but there is quite a bit of gross out humor in this movie. There's just an odd amount of peeing and detail on boogers and ugh. The sequels know how to do the humor a lot better and don't overuse any of the gross out stuff. There is still one big problem with the first movie though, and that would be Greg himself. Nothing wrong with the casting or anything, just the way he's written. I know I said it was super impressive with how faithful this movie was able to be to the books, but there is such a thing as being too faithful to the book. You see, Greg Heffley is basically Charlie Brown if he deserved and earned all the misfortune that happened to him. We are able to relate to him because he reminds us of all the worst parts about ourselves. We do have selfish moments every now and then, don't lie. It's not to make us sympathetic towards Greg, but to make us laugh harder when he gets what's coming to him. But the movie does try a bit too hard to make us feel sympathy for him. The sad music, the depressing camera angles, they're just trying to make us feel bad when something bad happens to him. And why wouldn't they? He's the protagonist. They'd want us to root for him. They just don't give us enough reasons to root for him. His friendship with Rowley seems super one-sided and not real enough for us to want them to come out okay. The narcissistic way Greg thinks of and talks about himself, there's just not enough go protagonist material to work with here. Aside from that problem though, the first movie still is a pretty decent watch.
Hey, Bryce. Yeah, hey, Bryce. Cute butt.
Then we come to the sequel, Roderick Rules, which many argue is the best of the three movies, and yeah, I actually see it. At first, I thought it was just the enormous mass of Roderick fangirls swooning over Devin Bostick being the star of this one, but this sequel actually has a surprising amount of improvements over the first one. First of all, Greg's character is a lot better here. His chemistry and friendship with Rowley feels a lot more real, and so does his relationship with Roderick. They actually managed to make us sympathize with Greg in this movie without losing his usual Gregginess as he selfishly tries to woo Holly Hills, the new girl. Now, Holly Hills didn't have this big of a role in the original books, but I feel like it was important to keep her a prominent character here. We were able to get tons of new interactions between Greg, Rowley, and Chirag, and she added an interesting new dynamic to their friend group that characters like Angie from the first movie could not.
We don't know who you are. We've no idea who you are. Okay.
Also mentioned previously is how this movie improves on the humor, less gross out, and more physical humor, as well as more well thought out situations to embarrass Greg. Another way this movie improves upon the first is how it follows the books. It doesn't follow them as closely as the first movie, but instead combines two different books in the form of Roderick Rules and The Last Straw. An example being how Greg and Roderick getting caught for the party they had in the second book led to them being stuck at their grandparents' retirement home in the third book. There are several different things like this in the movie and they make it work just about every time. But there's tons of original stuff too, like how close Roderick and Greg get. This is something I feel like the books actually failed at. Roderick felt very distant compared to the movies. Even when he was teasing and harassing Greg, he always felt like more of a school bully than an actual older brother. So I feel like this movie did an excellent job fixing that. So overall, this sequel was a lot funnier, it developed the characters a lot better, and anything new and original that happened felt like it was well integrated into the world that the books built. Roderick Rules was a step in the right direction.
Okay, Riley. Hold still. Wait.
Then we come to the third movie, Dog Days. Just like Roderick Rules, instead of following one specific book, it combines two. In this case, it combined the rest of The Last Straw that Roderick Rules didn't use, and the fourth book, Dog Days. Now, there's not a lot of new things I could say about this movie, I'd basically just be repeating what I said about Roderick Rules. The characters are developed more, things still flow really well, and the humor is still getting better. I honestly don't know what I could say about this movie to explain why it's better or worse than Roderick Rules. It basically just does the bare minimum of what a decent sequel can do. So I guess a positive is that it doesn't break anything. Like Roderick Rules, they kept Greg sympathetic without taking away his core character, and they kept Greg and Rowley's friendship feeling real so we'd care and want them to patch things up whenever something goes wrong. But overall, there's nothing too big.
You used to be so cool. Like me.
I guess there is some pretty funny and unusual stuff that happened during the production of this movie, like, for example, the actor who plays Greg is clearly getting older, and his voice is clearly changing. There's this one scene where Greg and Rowley go on this giant, super wild carnival ride, and it's just hilarious watching Greg's actor desperately try and scream, but nothing comes out. Also, for Rowley's actor, it is very clear that his hair is shaved. There is definitely a wig on that head. None of those things are super important though, and they don't make or break the movie, but I just found them very hilarious. But overall, that's pretty much all I have to say about Dog Days and this movie trilogy as a whole. I haven't seen and probably will never see The Long Haul based on the reviews and how awful the trailers were, but for these three movies, they'll definitely be a treat for you if you are a fan of the books. If you're not, you may not get as much out of them, so leave them to your little brother or something. I did enjoy rewatching these movies for the review, but I couldn't tell if they were actually good or if it was just nostalgia, so I guess you'll just have to see for yourself. I did learn that the reason these movies stand out though is because of the incredible cast. No matter how messy the movies would get, the characters would just continue to bring life into whatever situation they were in. And I have no clue how to end this video, so abrupt ending, bye.